Let's turn our attention now to Yemen. The U.S. and U.K. carrying out dozens of strikes against Houthi rebels overnight, attacking ships in the Red Sea, with the White House saying it will not hesitate to take further action if necessary. The action was intended to be a deterrent, but the Houthis have since vowed to retaliate, claiming the U.S. has broken international law. It comes as shipping companies have suspended sailings through the waterway, and already some companies are feeling the effects. Let's bring in Norman Roule, a non-resident senior advisor, CSIS Transnational Threats Project, and former senior U.S. intelligence official. Norman, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. I want to just start, Norman, with your reaction in response to this U.S.-UK military strikes. Norman, did you think it was the appropriate response, and how do you think the Houthis now react?
Oh, good afternoon. The strikes were limited, proportional, and conducted in a manner to avoid civilian casualties. They came after multiple warnings, a UN resolution authorizing defensive actions, multiple defensive operations against Houthi, attacks against civilian and military vessels, and also took place after multiple direct attacks on U.S. and partner shipping. They were clearly an appropriate response in a defensive environment for not only our personnel, but for the international economy. In terms of how the Houthis will respond, their capabilities have been degraded. There's a report that they fired a missile at a Russian ship that had its automatic identification indicator turned off southeast of Aden. But these attacks have posed no consequences on the Houthi leadership. And indeed, the attacks could have boosted their domestic prestige. We should expect the attacks to continue, albeit in an opportunistic way and not in a way that threatens a regional war.
And do you think, Norman, one opinion I've heard, I want to get your take on this, is that the Houthis might relent because, and this is the thinking, they obviously are fighting this civil war in Yemen, and so, Norman, they wouldn't want to also be fighting the U.S., the U.K., and allies. It would make them too vulnerable to their domestic rivals. What do you think about that argument?
There's no evidence for that, and considerable evidence to say the opposite. Within Yemen, the Palestinian cause is popular. There have been pro-Palestinian, pro-Palestine, anti-American demonstrations today. The Houthis seek to enhance their regional stature, and by undertaking these actions and surviving, they're demonstrating that they have stood up to the United States and Israel. And I should remind your viewers that the Houthi flag and motto is "Curse the Jews, death to Israel, death to the United States." So they're pretty clear as to their motivations.
Yeah, that's clear in terms of their purpose and strategy here, Norman. But if they continue attacking, I guess my question is, Norman, if they continue attacking, even on a limited basis, going after merchant ships, our U.S. naval assets, shutting down the Red Sea, that has just this enormous implications, Norman, for global trade. It's beginning to hit specific companies. I'm sure you saw the news from Tesla today. That doesn't sound tenable. What would be our next reaction? What would you think we would do next?
Well, you're absolutely right. And in fact, the United States has urged U.S. flag shipping to stay away from the area in the near term. All major flag carriers not associated with Russia and China have avoided the area. And this has imposed new expenses on all shipping costs worldwide, to include shipping costs from China to Los Angeles, which does not transit the Middle East, but involves a higher rate of pay for ships that are available. The United States is facing a choice. Does it continue to just play defense, or does it undertake a serious long-term action to degrade Houthi missile, drone, naval mine, and explosive boat capabilities? We shouldn't underestimate the amount of resources or commitment required to do that. But the alternative is asking ourselves, what is victory? Is victory just maintaining a long-term presence and catching every drone and missile they fire? There will be a lot of those.
And Norman, is the real issue here, though, we can talk about degrading the Houthis, but the real issue is Iran, right? I mean, these are all Iranian proxies, Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah. I mean, is that the real issue? Unless you're really taking on Iran more directly, are you really dealing with the issue?
No, you're absolutely correct. Iran is universally understood to be the enabler of all regional violence, to include the October 7th massacre against Israel. And this violence now touches the global economy. However, it's paid no price. The Biden administration has made no mention of Iran in its statement on the conflict. So in essence, the current state of play gives Iran everything you would want if you were a revisionist aggressor: influence over and damage of your adversaries without any cost. The international community shows no appetite for expanding this conflict into actions on Iran.
And Norman, I want to ask you this too. As I understand it, it was Trump that designated the Houthis a terrorist group. It was Biden that reversed that. In your opinion, Norman, was that a policy mistake?
Well, I think the issue is it's always appropriate to consider diplomatic options. But when diplomatic options become something akin to an ideology or religion, that's an error. And it's not a bad thing to say we offered someone an opportunity to turn the page, but if they didn't take the page, somehow we've now made this our problem and not their problem. The Houthis are behaving like non-state actors and terrorists. They should be designated and treated as such. We should note, however, that doing so may complicate humanitarian deliveries and will complicate some regional diplomacy that has produced a relatively stable ceasefire with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates.
Norman, I want to get you out of here on this. There are some lawmakers, I'm sure you saw this, including Democrats, by the way, criticized President Biden, said, listen, he should have approved these strikes with us, with Congress. Do you agree with that criticism?
Well, there is certainly some criticism of this action by individuals on the right and the left, but a couple of points. We haven't declared war on the Houthis. The president is authorized to undertake defensive actions to protect U.S. forces. As long as he notifies Congress within 48 hours, it appears the administration has done just that. And whereas Congress is required to formally declare war, the president may undertake such actions by U.S. law. This is something that politicians and lawyers will argue over, but at the end of the day, the administration did what it was supposed to do.
Norman, it was so great to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining the show, giving us and our viewers that time and insight. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.